was the beginning of the journey, which is still on till today. We are still on the journey towards African unity and African economic integration.
Perhaps one journey we've almost completed in Africa is that of colonialism, because in those days we had many colonies: South Africa, Namibia, Zimbabwe, Cape Verde, Guinea-Bissau, were all colonies. Then Africa decided that there must be liberation in Africa, and it set up the special committee for the liberation of Africa. And you played quite some role in that, from the position of the African Union.
Yeah. Well, as Assistant Secretary General and the OAU, I was first in charge of political affairs, and so technically the Special Committee for the Liberation of Africa was under my purview. But it was called Special Committee because it was made up of a select number of member states who then produced a report, even if it's a meeting at official level, a report that went straight to the summit, because the summit took decisions on critical issues affecting African liberation. Like you said, we still had so many colonies that were not yet independent. So the decolonization of Africa, in fact, that's why it is the Special Committee for the Liberation of Africa. That was the number one item on the agenda of the OAU, really. And that's why for a long time the European EU, then it wasn't EU, it was EEC, they regarded the OAU as a political organization, and all their attempts to drive a wedge between different African countries, so the radicals and the
conservative
and exactly, Casablanca group and Monrovia group, all those were just attempts to hide away a number of African countries under their influence, so that we don't fall into the hands of the opponent, which was seen then as Russia or the Soviet Union. So this was a part of the Cold War. Africa became the battlefield of the Cold War in so many ways. But the OAU saved us from that, being that battlefield, at least saved us from the worst consequences of being a battlefield.
Thank you very much. We are on Diplomatic Hour with Owei Lakemfa on Citizen 93.7 FM, Abuja. And we are speaking with Ambassador Branson Dede, who is part of the African history. Sir, in the Liberation Committee, you must have met a lot of our liberation fighters. Can you talk to us about some of them? Jogo Giso and co?
Oh yeah, those were the characters. May his soul rest in peace. Before he died, he was the first Minister of Defense of the Mandela government.
Okay, South Africa.
In those days, when we used to go to meetings in Dar es Salaam on the Special Committee, Joe Modise was the head of Umkhonto we Sizwe. Umkhonto we Sizwe is the Zulu name for the Spear of the Nation, which is the armed wing of the ANC. Yes. People like Zuma and others were all members of Umkhonto we Sizwe, the fighters. And these fighters of the ANC were trained in different countries with the help of different countries. Algeria was almost number one in terms of providing what we call military assistance to the fighters. Today, people from Namibia, from Zimbabwe, and of course from South Africa don't joke with Algeria, because the literal, I'm not saying Nigeria didn't do much, but I'm talking of the practical side of things. When you talk of guns, weapons of fighting, and training of military people, it was Algeria. Because after Nasser, Egypt just paid lip service. I'm sorry, but I'm being very frank. Paid lip service to African liberation and all that. Didn't do much. Not Sadat. He wasn't interested. So Algeria and then Libya. These were the countries in North Africa that cared about the rest of Africa, liberation. So these were the people. Then of course you had people from Mozambique itself. the great leader, Samuel Machel, some of his followers, or junior people, was the foreign minister who became president. Joachim Chissano.
Okay, Joachim, yeah.
Chissano, there were people who at that time they used to come for the Liberation Committee meetings. From Zimbabwe, people like Mugabe didn't come to, because they were, in fact, for almost 10 years it was, people forget that Mugabe was
in prison. Yes.
Most of his education he did in prison. He studied in prison, or had degrees in prison. And he was one of the most, that any exaggeration, one of the most intelligent African leaders I've ever met. Maybe because of the way he studied. There was something up there. And when you come in for any discussions on the independence of Zimbabwe, even during those negotiations, you know that you were dealing with a guy who knew what he was talking about. And this is why they found him such an obstacle. It wasn't because of his so-called socialist ideas that they were afraid he was going to kill all the white people. No. It was because they knew that he was a true inheritor of Nkrumah's ideas. You know, his first wife also was from Ghana.
Yes.
Yeah. He was a true African liberationist, if you can use that term, Mugabe. And that's why they didn't like him throughout. And some of us were made to dislike him also because Mugabe was made to look like the devil. And any African leader who liked the devil was not a good African leader. So we read the extent where we had to sometimes abandon Mugabe in order to be well received or well regarded by the Western powers, who are our traditional friends, we are told.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was your experience? You met Sam Nujoma.
Of course.
Yeah. What was your experience like?
Sam Nujoma and the Namibian leaders in those days, and even now, after retirement and so forth, and I can say this again bluntly, out of all the countries in Southern Africa, Angola, Mozambique, South Africa itself, the Namibians are the people who have never, anywhere they go, any meeting, they've never forgotten the contribution of Nigeria to their liberation. Always. At least, again, I can say that if I were writing my memoir, I would say Namibia is an exception. Anywhere you go, they take a position and they will say, look, okay, we're going to follow SADC, but, our heart is with Nigeria. They stand up and say courageously. Or if they are going to abandon their collective position from SADC, they will say, we're not following SADC anymore. We did that during our first vote. Now we have to follow Nigeria because we know what Nigeria did for us. That is the kind of, you don't expect that from everybody every time.
Yes,
but Namibia was part of it. So Sam Nujoma and the other leaders, including Hage Geingob, the president. Yeah, who were together too in one of the World Bank groups they used to call, what was that now? They had a Global Coalition for Africa, yes. We used to attend those meetings. I was representing the OAU in those meetings as part of trying to use the IMF World Bank consensus to cool down many African countries. So we're all part of it. But those days, Namibians were very good.
I don't think you met Winnie Mandela because she was in South Africa.
Are you kidding?
Oh, you did?
Yes, because you see the beauty of that period was that, like when I was special assistant to General Garba, we traveled everywhere. That was the time when, as many people say, not me, but many people say so, that Nigerian foreign policy then was very active and very, how would I say,
Pan-Africanist.
Yeah, the Pan-Africanist, that's the word for it, because Africa was the centerpiece of our foreign policy then. So we traveled to Eastern and Southern Africa regularly. meet so many of these people. Even Joshua Nkomo. I don't know how many meetings we had with Joshua Nkomo at the airport in London on many, many occasions. It's not just once, twice. Or we go to Dar es Salaam. At that time, maybe you might have somebody from Mozambique who is there within your area, and then you will have a meeting too with them at State House. Although 90% of the time in your area, never. From 1975, when I became Special Assistant to General Garba, till I became OAU Assistant Secretary General and all that, so many, many times I went to Dar es Salaam, you will never find Henry in State House. In a small seaside bungalow by the sea, where he lives, simple, I would almost call it wooden chairs. That's Henry. He never, I don't think throughout his presidency he ever slept in the State House. He was a simple Mwalimu. It's like Madam Amino Khan. Because Mwalimu is the same Swahili from Madam, the teacher. It's simple, down to earth man. Those were different, everybody can be natural. But they were very simple, but principled people. Yeah. I met Winnie Mandela. Anybody who forgets Winnie Mandela is not paying the right tribute. Because for 20-something years while Mandela was in prison, Winnie Mandela was the face of the anti-apartheid struggle. Everywhere in the world. That's why how many times was he locked up? Because it's like your brother will say, this calabash, when you press calabash down, it doesn't stay. Even if you fill it with water, it will stay float. They try to do everything short of killing her. But she was there. She was the face of the anti-apartheid struggle. Winnie Mandela going everywhere. Mandela was in prison. You had all these people who knew Zuma then, except those of us who were working with the Liberation Committee. Nobody knew Zuma. Nobody knew even Thabo Mbeki, except at the higher level, where he was the ANC Foreign Affairs representative in different places, including Nigeria. The face of anti-apartheid struggle was Winnie Mandela. But they were afraid. She was a radical woman, left wing, as they say. Maybe she would succeed her husband if things followed due process. Yes. She would have, because they would vote for her. The ANC youth wing and all the others will vote for Winnie Mandela. She was, but then there was a systematic campaign to rubbish the woman completely, and then towards the end, everybody said, didn't do anything, blah, blah. No. History is not that. History deals with the facts. It's only you people nowadays who deal with what they call alternative facts.
No, that's quite incredible. But one person like Winnie, well, not as known as her, but who people have said played a major role in liberation of Africa.
Yeah.
It's a man called Amilcar Cabral, who came from Guinea-Bissau and came back.
Yeah.
And you met him a number of times.
I met Amilcar Cabral when I was a very junior officer in the Africa Department, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Lagos. It was my friend, Friday Fode, my classmate, who was working with NBC, as called Radio Nigeria, who asked me to come and interview Amilcar Cabral. I hadn't heard much about him. I was just fresh out of University College Ibadan, joined the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So we had to sit down in one room first to talk generally. I didn't know he was, although, what did I know? That he was a Fulani from Guinea-Bissau, Paul, as we call them in French, Le Paul. And he was, my goodness. You see, there are freedom fighters who were not only well-read, but well-principled, dedicated to the liberation of their country. So you met him, and that's what some people call charisma, yes. You met him, simple man with his woolly hat sometimes. You know. I said, this is hot weather, you put this woolly, put a hat on your head. But he was down to it. Amika Cabral. Then, after my first posting in Washington, I was posted to Guinea. This was January 1970. And of course, who would have been there? Amika Cabral. But he was living in Guinea Conakry. And we had to work closely together because if I may say that now openly, when there was the Portuguese attempt to overthrow with the help of the West, to overthrow Secretary in November 1970, they also tried to assassinate Amika Cabral. Mm-hmm. But yes, at that time they didn't succeed. They succeeded later, years later.
Yeah.
But from that time onwards, the Nigerian government, there were two people, I still remember them, because they were young majors at that time. One was Major McConaughey, and the other was Major Bello. He's now retired. It's AVM Bello. He's working in Lagos. Yeah. They were flying these old planes, they call DC-3s, transport planes, to bring weapons to both Guinea government and to Amika Cabral's fighters. That was
Guinea-Bissau, PAIGC.
Yes, that's when I met him again in Guinea, and we established regular contact. So
what was that meeting like? Was it at the airport or where?
In my house. I was serving affairs.
Okay.
Yes,
okay.
at that time, the ambassador had not come, and I had to be involved in everything, receiving the planes at the airport and getting the weapons offloaded, the guns and all that.
Okay, you are responsible for that.
Well, I wasn't the government. I mean, I was just
representing the Nigerian government.
Of course.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This was the government of General Gowon.
Yes.
Yeah. But very helpful to Guinea and to Guinea-Bissau, to Amika Cabral. They were. So every time, I remember the first time when he came to my house in Conakry, I was scared. Why was I scared? What happened was, I was sitting on the balcony. There's an elevated balcony. It's like a platform. Okay. It's as big as this room. But suddenly I found armed people all over the place. I said, what the hell is going on? That is a mistake. This is the diplomatic house. I didn't know Amika Cabral was coming, and they had just arrived 5 minutes to secure the place before he comes. So when I saw, sorry, my friend, what is happening? I thought you were going to arrest me. Said, no, these are the people, they are the
Were they Guinean or from
no.
Guinea-Bissau? They are part of the PAIGC.
Yes, PAIGC people.
Okay, Liberation Fighters.
Yes. But the Guinean security, of course, also.
Of course, they work with them.
Overall, yes.
Yeah, what was your reaction when you heard he was assassinated? Amika Cabral.
It's like what happened to Samura Machel too. He was assassinated. That plane crashed. We know that the plane was brought down. So Amika Cabral, the tragedy of Africa. Our leaders, and this happens to black leaders including, I'm sorry, I can say that bluntly too, even in the United States and all over the world, any black leader who raised his head against any occupying force or any imperialist force was eliminated. Joseph Kabila, they brought him from the bush, gave him to Mandela to come and introduce to the OAU. I was there. When they wanted to get rid of him, they said, some of his guards. Did you hear anything to let no? Some of his guards were don't they just killed him and then they left. That's what they do. If you are an obstacle, you are on their way, they get rid of you. Remember, it's a clear example. He was pain in the ass. I'm sorry, that language already. Pain in the neck, I would say. And they got rid of him. So that's what they do everywhere. everywhere. It's a policy. They call it regime change. Now they do it democratically. They can get to democratically. Erected. Not elected, but erected.
Erected.
Yes.
Yeah, what was your experience like with Secretary?
Secretary is, or was, is the nominee. He's still rest in peace.
Amen.
First, these were convinced Pan-Africanists. It's not, you don't need to preach to them about African unity. It was part of their mental makeup right from beginning. He was a trade unionist, very committed to workers' rights and things like that. That kind of social justice background. I don't want to call it socialism because that's become ideological. Yes, social justice. Secretary was, and then the French. I mean, it's no exaggeration. The French they cleaned everything out of that place. They wanted to punish Secretary and Guinea for voting to go outside the French community, which de Gaulle was designing, a kind of French Commonwealth that would put everybody on. Secretary was a genuine Pan-Africanist. That was why when Nkrumah was overthrown, he brought Nkrumah to Guinea and then altered their constitution to make Nkrumah co-president of Guinea. Many people used to think that this was a joke. No, it was a serious. The constitution of Guinea was amended and Nkrumah was made co-president. And at that time, that Guinea, Ghana, and Mali were trying to form the nucleus of the African Union. And you have some songs you used to sing in those days, the nucleus of the African Union, blah, blah, Ghana, Guinea, Mali, and so forth. It was a song from Ghana. Now, Modibo Keita was the counterpart. Those three people, they were not communists. You and I know that they were not communists. They were social justice advocates and Pan-Africanists. And I will always admire, until my death, I will always admire Secretary because they had the courage. They had nothing. Although, as we discovered later, till today, Guinea has close to 70% of the world's known deposit of bauxite. That's the raw material for aluminium. Yeah. With all the problems that Guinea has been going through, like Congo, nobody ever touches the exploitation of aluminium. The exploitation of those resources go on very smoothly. You might be having your political problems and having government overthrown right, left, and center, but that one is going on smoothly. It's like Liberian steel, iron and steel. Liberian iron ore. It's always been smoothly exploited, no matter what confusion happens in Liberia. Yeah.
Listeners, you are listening to Diplomatic Hour with Owei Lakemfa on Citizen 93.7 FM. I'm speaking with Ambassador Branson Dede, who is part of African history, as you can see. Ambassador, how would you characterize Nkrumah? I mean, who was Nkrumah? Kwame Nkrumah
was, I would say, one of the fathers of African unity. Number one, that's undeniable. There's no doubt about that one. And he also, like most of the leaders of the independence era, including our own Balewa and others, they had foresight, really. They thought ahead of their time. Most of the things that Nkrumah wrote about and spoke about before he was overthrown, today you'll find him there. He will ask us, how did this man know that we're going to even neo-colonialism? When he used the term, people just thought it was like we say, Turenchi. No. He knew that after colonization there was going to be other different type of colonization, which is what when we're dissolving the Liberation Committee, almost after the release of Mandela in 1990 from prison and all that, and the OAU took a decision to now dissolve the special committee. I'm sorry to wander that way. We made a joke, but now I look back at it, it's very pregnant. Salim, he talks in this funny way, with small voice. I don't see why you should be dissolving this committee. You should change it to African Economic Liberation Committee, and everybody laughed. But the reality now is we need an Economic Liberation Committee on this continent because our resources are controlled by, not by us, but by other people. And we are the only people in the whole world who produce anything, but we can't put a price to it. We cannot tell you how much we want to sell this thing that we produce. If you know any item that comes out of Africa and the price is fixed by an African government, tell me the item. Not even your cocoa. You don't fix the price. The price is fixed for you by the futures market in London. Your oil, the price is fixed for you by the West Texas Intermediate and London Brent. Have you ever asked anybody where is London Brent? It doesn't exist. You see, all these are, we joke about this, but these are the smoke and mirrors that they use to determine, at the time when they were producing North Sea oil, the production never exceeded 2-3 million barrels a day. It's just a drop in the ocean of world demand, daily demand for oil. But then they put themselves, that was a way of taking back control of the pricing of oil. There's been a long fight ever since Gaddafi came and radicalized OPEC. So those are the kind of games we play. But
when you mentioned somebody very important to us, Gaddafi, but before we come to Gaddafi, let's look at Kenneth Kaunda.
Yes, okay.
He was, in this whole liberation thing about Africa.
You see,
did you meet him?
Of course. Again, if you say 20 times, it will not be enough. I don't know, there was a time when we were referred to, Nigeria was referred to as a frontline state. Yeah. At that time, we used to fly. There was no month we don't go to Southern Africa, to Lusaka and Dar es Salaam. No month, really. It was that period. Because it might sound like an exaggeration, but I remember many times we'd come back from a trip and at Lagos Airport, because this was not the age of cell phones, we would be informed that the president, Obasanjo, because Murtala had died, Obasanjo had taken over, and the policies were unchanged, because in those days Obasanjo was as radical as they can. He and MD Yusuf, the late Inspector General of Police, they were the people who actually dictating Angolan policy, our policy towards Angola. I'm not saying it's wrong, it was good, but they, to show how radical they were in those days. So we used to go to Dar es Salaam and Lusaka regularly. And Kaunda, of course, you couldn't go to South Africa to talk to Kaunda because he was in the middle of things. He was dependent on South African ports for the export of copper, which is Zambia's #1 produce. And so, Nyerere and Kaunda, with the help of Africa, persuaded the Chinese to build a railway line from the copper belt to the port of Dar es Salaam in
Zambia Railways, yes. Built by the Chinese.
It was built by the Chinese.
Free.
Of course. Whatever loan there was, How can you even pay for it now? It was almost 2,000 kilometers. And 90% of the workers in those days were Chinese. Because many of our African workers have had no experience in railway building, railway maintenance. In this country you can't get, it's only now that you find Nigerians again involved in railway construction, although they are more in dismantling railway tracks to sell them for whatever. Yeah, those were the days of KK. And Kaunda, no, he did a lot. The only weakness we found in him was he was a bit difficult to read on Zimbabwe.
Okay.
The reason was you have Zambia was Northern Rhodesia, as it was called in those days, and Zimbabwe was Southern Rhodesia. There was a complex relationship.
Joshua Nkomo
was very close to Zambia.
Yes, sir.
But Mugabe and Joshua Nkomo never saw eye to eye. So Zambia then was not very close to the Mugabe wing of the Patriotic Front. That created a problem for us because every time we went and we wanted to interact directly with, that's why we had to meet with Nkomo generally mostly outside of, in London.
Yeah.
The reason we were always meeting with him in London was because a man called Tiny Rollins, yeah, who was the managing director, CEO, chairman, CEO of the Lonro. Lonro is London Rhodesia Company. It's a group.
Okay, it was Rhodesia, I see.
London Rhodesia.
Yeah.
London Rhodesia.
Yeah.
Lonro.
I see.
A multimillionaire. He was very close to the liberation people because he wanted to protect his businesses after independence. So he was genuinely involved in finding a solution. Telling the whites that they cannot continue fighting. And Zambia was a good person to talk to, Kaunda. So that also made Kaunda's role. Mugabe and others they were more radical. They didn't like to see Lonro and all those capitalists and new colonialists ready to pounce on their resources because, as you know, till today, Zimbabwe has a lot of mineral resources. Zambia has mainly copper, but Zimbabwe has diamonds. They may not be as much as South African diamonds, but they have diamonds, they have gold, they have platinum, they have all that mineral resources, major resources. So Kaunda was a recurring, always there, involved.
Thank you very much. Let's speak very briefly about Samora Machel.
Oh no.
Your meetings with him.
Samora Machel, a public character.
Mozambique.
And that is what till today, most African countries, including Nigeria here, you say the slogan, "Aluta continua."
Yeah.
That is Samora Machel. He will never make a speech or finish without ending with "Aluta continua." The struggle continues. That was Samora Machel. Now, again, that brand of African liberationist in Mozambique, it was different from Angola. And I would say why? The Angola man, Agostinho Neto, was an intellectual, and he intended to be intellectually rigid about things. I remember making fun of him and say he's always talking about the proletariat. Where is the proletariat in Angola? They are all peasants. They are fighting for the peasants, others are fighting for the proletariat. No. Now, Samora Machel was a real, I don't know how to put it, a mobilizer of people. That's the best way to put it. A passionate Pan-Africanist, really. The people with different characters. When he talks, it's like he's all bouncing on his seat or on his feet. liar. That's the way he was. He was a determined anti-imperialist fighter and a true liberationist. And that's why they killed him. Because he wasn't concerned only with Mozambique. No. He had special links to the ANC
Liberation Front.
Yeah. They're working together. If you go and look at the map, you'll see the different routes. And the present area now that is close to South Africa, to where the gas, the northern, what they call that province. When you're talking like this, you forget the names of. It's close to the South African border, where a lot of gas has been discovered, where you now have also jihadists.
Okay.
Yes. These things always manage to materialize when you are negotiating on the exploitation of your resources, so that they can come to help you fight these people. While you are looking this way, they are taking your resources on the ship. Because there is enormous gas discovered in Mozambique and in Mexico, in Tanzania. So there's a lot of gas in those two places. But Samora Machel, after they killed him, they arranged to sabotage his plane and kill him, just like they did to the Rwandan president.
Abarimana.
Yes. Yeah, same way. They then brought, can you see the maneuver? This, as the Nigerians will say, Koro Koro Island. They brought the wife of Samora Machel and made her the wife of Mandela.
Nelson Mandela.
To cool him down. I got rid of Winnie Mandela. So it was like almost a compensation. And of course, but we all followed. Graça Machel became the first lady of South Africa. Can you imagine that? I'm not saying she doesn't deserve to be.
No, I mean,
but it was the maneuver. It
needed
maneuver
to lead Mozambique.
Yeah.
Well, let's look at the role of Gaddafi and integration. Muammar Gaddafi.
I want to open a can of worms. Okay, a can of worms will be negative.
Yeah.
Open a Pandora's box.
Okay.
No, Gaddafi. Well, okay. This is my personal opinion, which I also took from other people. Gaddafi is, in chemistry in those days at school, we have an element they call a catalyst. You put it in the experiment, it fast tracks the process, but ends up remains unchanged. The reason I put it that way is Gaddafi was a radical to the core, yes. And he believed everything he was doing, yes. Again, the Cold War perspective made many of us in the early years not to see the true picture. We only saw the picture that was presented to us by the Western media. And we had no alternative facts in those days. Until his death, even, we followed that, many of us followed that mistake. But Gaddafi was truly committed. Of course he had ambitions. Who wouldn't have? Who doesn't want to be, if you had an African government, who wouldn't want to be president of Africa? How many people want to be president of Nigeria now?
No more than 50.
So there was nothing wrong with his ambition. But the point was it doing any good? Yes. He made us see certain things that we tended to overlook because of this traditional friendship that we always pretended to have with people. So we didn't see the evil that they were doing. But Gaddafi made us see it. And look at Libya today. Nobody in this world will tell me that Libya is better off today now than it was under Gaddafi, the so-called dictator. What have they brought to Libya now? And we joined. You see, this is one of the sad things about Africa. We joined in killing Gaddafi, if you can put it that way, by voting for the UN resolution that said they should take all necessary measures to say, they were preventing him from killing these people. Which people were Gaddafi killing? Please tell me which people he was killing every day. Anybody got married in Libya, he had money from the government to settle down, to get an apartment, depending on you. You want to go to school, you're free. Is this scholarship? You have a scholarship to go to Italy or to somewhere. All that was. It may not be a good idea, but that was how I was running the thing. He didn't have money. How many billions of Gaddafi's money have you heard was being returned to Libya from some Western banks? Where are his houses in any country? Go and show me where Gaddafi had a house somewhere, but outside Libya. Please, I know you give a dog a bad name, not to hang it or to kill it, but he was a true Pan-Africanist. And right until I left Addis Ababa in 1999, the summit of September, which I missed, September 1999, was in Sita, Gaddafi's hometown, which I understand is virtually destroyed now. But he built so many buildings there because he was hoping to have the new AU. As OAU was transiting to AU, he was hoping to have it in Libya. So he offices, his high buildings, everywhere in Sita.
Before we round up, there is this famous African that is virtually unknown in Nigeria, Professor Adebayo Adedeji. You know, he's been anywhere I go in Africa, people ask about him.
May his soul rest in peace.
Amen. So Adebayo Adedeji, who was he?
I became, I'm the one calling myself so, a true disciple of Adebayo Adedeji when I got to Addis Ababa and Owei. He was already there. I knew him before, not closely, but I knew who he was when he was Minister for the Economic Development and Reconstruction of Gowon. And he was responsible for doing the paperwork for what became ECOWAS.
Oh, I see.
Gowon didn't just wake up one morning and say ECOWAS. For Christ's sake. Many people forget that a lot of these things are done by public servants, so you brought them ready for the big man to endorse. Now, Adebayo Adedeji was head of the ECA
Economic Community for Africa.
16 years. The United Nations Economic Community of Africa. For 16 years. And in those 16 years, he was responsible for practically every African integration institution, from the preferential trade area for Eastern and Southern Africa to COMESA, the common market for Eastern and Southern Africa, to SADC. It was Adedeji. Many people don't know. Of course, he has started by the Lagos Plan of Action. Many people have heard of Lagos Plan of Action, but they don't even know what it is. The Lagos Plan of Action was launched, prepared by Adedeji and his staff, was launched in 1980 during the Shagari regime in one of those OAU summits. People again forget about it. But anytime you can get a copy of the Lagos Plan of Action, the Final Act of Lagos, it's not a bulky book. It's a pamphlet, if you can call it that. Read it. Adedeji started on the premise that, one, Africa is cut into little pieces, from the Sierra Leone to the Gabon to Equatorial Guinea, where we are meeting now in the summit. All the small countries, and even the Nigerians of this world. Integration was a must. So that is, he used the term, it is not a choice. It's not just you don't have alternatives. It's something you must do. So that was his preaching. And the IMF and others, especially when he came up with the Africa's own planning for structural adjustment, because he was intellectually opposed to structural adjustment program. And he didn't do it alone by himself. You see, that's the trouble with many people. They just say, I did it. The man worked for years with several African economists, including those people, Africans working in the World Bank and IMF. They all came together and produced that book on the Africans, AFSAF, Alternative to African to Structural Adjustment. And nobody remembers that, even in this country.
Thank you very much.
The man died 3 years ago.
Yeah.
But I forget.
Thank you very much, sir. This is Diplomatic Hour with Owei Lakemfa on Citizen 93.7 FM, Abuja. We have been speaking with Ambassador Bronson Dede, part of African history. Thank you very much, sir, for coming.
God bless you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wake up. Reach out. Speak up. Speak out. You are the voice of a new generation. And this is your station. Talk Radio 93.7 Citizen